Soviet-era technology refuses to die. These are machines built by a nation that no longer exists, and yet they refuse to stop working. Tanks designed in 1946 are rolling into combat in 2024. A rocket first launched in the 1960s remained the only way for American astronauts to reach space for nearly a decade. A subway system built under Stalin still moves 8 million people a day with 99.9% punctuality. And somewhere in a collector's apartment, a vacuum cleaner manufactured in 1945 still hums along without complaint. This is the story of Soviet-era technology and why so much of it simply won't die. To understand why Soviet machines last so long, you need to understand the philosophy behind them. That philosophy was forged in the most brutal classroom in human history, the Eastern Front of World War II. Between 1941 and 1945, the Soviet Union lost an estimated 27 million people. Its factories were bombed, its supply lines stretched across a continent. Its soldiers were often poorly trained conscripts thrown into unimaginable conditions. In that crucible, Soviet engineers and military planners reached a conclusion that would shape their approach to technology for the next half-century. Fancy, complicated designs may look impressive on the parade ground, but they will fail in real war. That single idea became the foundation of everything. Simplicity, reliability, mass production. Those three principles, in that order, took precedence over all other considerations. Not elegance, not sophistication, not even raw performance. If a weapon or vehicle or spacecraft could not function when it was freezing, when it was covered in mud, when it was operated by a barely trained 18-year-old who had not slept in 3 days, then it was useless. Period. This was not ignorance or an inability to build complex things. This was a deliberate, strategic choice. Soviet designers favored simplicity, reliability under harsh conditions, and production scalability over technological sophistication. They used conventional, readily available construction materials. They standardized parts and assemblies across different platforms whenever possible, and they deliberately avoided detailed finishing, the kind of polish and refinement that Western manufacturers considered a mark of quality, because polish does not matter when you are fighting in -40 degrees. Many people in the West laughed at this approach. They saw the rough welds, the utilitarian aesthetics, the lack of creature comforts, and they called it crude. They were wrong. What they were looking at was not a weakness. It was a weapon. Let's start with arguably the most famous piece of Soviet engineering ever created, the AK-47. Mikhail Kalashnikov was not a famous engineer or a weapons expert with degrees from prestigious institutions. He was a young, humble tank mechanic who had been injured in the war. Most accounts say he began thinking about better rifle ideas while stuck in a hospital bed, watching Soviet soldiers struggle with unreliable equipment. From that frustration came a design philosophy he put simply: don't design for a perfect world because the world is not perfect. Design simple things that are rugged, reliable, and easy to use. Things that work even when conditions are chaotic. Things that work even when they are mostly broken. The result was a rifle with generous tolerances between its moving parts. Where Western rifles were machined to tight specifications, the AK-47 had deliberate looseness, gaps that allowed mud, sand, and debris to pass through without jamming the mechanism. It had fewer parts than most comparable weapons, meaning fewer things could break. And the parts it did have were absurdly overbuilt. The original slab-sided AK magazines are so ludicrously overbuilt that they can be used as hammers regularly and still function. Think about that. You can literally pound nails with the magazine of an AK-47, slot it back into the rifle, and it will fire without issue. This, perhaps more than anything, explains the AK-47's reputation as a supremely reliable rifle. With over 100 million AK-47 rifles and variants produced since it was officially adopted in 1949, the AK-47 remains the most widely used assault rifle on the planet. It has armed the militaries of over 100 nations. It appears on the flag of Mozambique. Nearly 80 years after its design, it is still being manufactured, still being carried into combat, still functioning in every climate on Earth. Now consider the T-54 and T-55 tank. This design evolved directly from the legendary T-34 tank that helped win World War II, inheriting its predecessor's emphasis on simplicity and battlefield reliability. First adopted by the Soviet military in 1946, the T-54 became the most produced tank in human history. The numbers are almost hard to believe. Over 100,000 T-54 and T-55 main battle tanks were manufactured during the Cold War. Production continued in the Soviet Union through 1981, but the tanks kept going long after the factories stopped. They have been used by the armies of at least 50 nations, and in February 2024, Russia deployed what was identified as likely an older T-54, a design adopted in 1946, to attack Ukrainian positions around Robotyne, a tank designed almost 80 years ago, still being sent into combat. Not because it is the best tank available, but because it still works. Defense analysts widely interpret the renewed visibility of T-55 variants as evidence of continued reliance on long-stored Soviet-era equipment rather than the introduction of meaningful new capabilities. But the fact that these machines can be pulled out of storage after decades, started up, and driven into a war zone tells you something profound about how they were built. Let's go higher. Let's go supersonic. The MiG-21, designed by the Bureau founded by Artem Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich back in 1939, entered service in 1958 as a simple, low-cost day fighter. It became the most produced supersonic fighter in aviation history, with over 11,000 units manufactured across multiple countries. Approximately 60 countries across 4 continents have flown the MiG-21. And here's the remarkable part. It still serves many nations 7 decades after its maiden flight. 7 decades. The broader MiG family tells an even bigger story. The total volume of MiG aircraft produced by domestic factories reaches about 47,000 copies. Factor in licensed production abroad, and that number rises to approximately 62,000. The earlier MiG-15, first flown in 1947, and its successor, the MiG-17, together saw about 28,000 units built and used by 36 different nations. Former Soviet test pilot M. Gale once explained the thinking behind these aircraft. A plane does not live by speed alone. Consequently, all our efforts were directed toward getting the new fighters off with the goal of making them reliable and accessible to any pilot of average qualifications. In a major war, you will not get very far on aces alone. That idea, that your technology has to work for the average user in the worst conditions, runs like a thread through every piece of Soviet engineering. The Tu-95 Bear bomber, first flown in 1952, continues flying missions today, making it one of the longest-serving military aircraft in history. The MiG-31 Interceptor, which entered serial production in 1979 and operational service in 1981, is expected to remain in service until at least 2030. In 2020, the Russian Defense Ministry announced it would extend the service lifetime of existing airframes from 2,500 to 3,500 hours. These are aircraft designed during the Carter administration that will still be patrolling Russian airspace in the 2030s. But perhaps nothing captures the Soviet approach to durability quite like the Soyuz spacecraft. The Soyuz rocket was born out of the mind of Sergei Korolev, the chief designer credited with most of the USSR's rocketry and space successes. The spacecraft was originally designed as part of the moon missions, and the first Soyuz mission, Cosmos 133, launched unmanned on November 28, 1966. The original Soyuz rocket family traces its lineage back even further, to the R-7, the same rocket that launched Sputnik in 1957 and put Yuri Gagarin into space in 1961. Gagarin's historic flight aboard the Vostok spacecraft proved that Soviet space technology could safely carry humans beyond Earth's atmosphere, establishing the foundation of trust that the Soyuz program would build upon. Counting all R7 family members, this lineage has accumulated over 2,000 flights, an unmatched record in rocketry. The Soyuz U variant, which first flew on May 18, 1973, operated continuously for almost 44 years before its final flight on February 22, 2017. During that time, it flew a total of 786 missions, a world record. In 1979, the Soyuz U achieved 47 flights in a single year, a record that stood until SpaceX's Falcon 9 beat it in 2022. The overall Soyuz family has flown more than 1,500 times, with an approximate 97% success rate. The modern Soyuz 2 variants have an even higher success rate. The spacecraft has flown over 120 consecutive flights without loss of life. Here's what makes this truly extraordinary. After NASA retired the Space Shuttle fleet in 2011, the United States of America, the most technologically advanced nation on Earth, had no way to send its own astronauts to space. For 9 years, from 2011 to 2020, every single American astronaut who traveled to the International Space Station did so aboard a Soyuz, a Soviet-designed capsule riding atop a rocket whose fundamental architecture dates back to the 1950s, was the only ride to orbit for the nation that put men on the moon. As of 2026, Soyuz 2 continues to fly, carrying GLONASS navigation satellites, military payloads, Progress cargo spacecraft to the International Space Station, and crewed missions. Now, let's go underground. The Moscow Metro opened on May 15, 1935, with a single 11-kilometer line serving 13 stations. It was built in an astonishing 3.5 years. More than a transport system, it was a statement of Soviet ambition. The man overseeing its construction, Lazar Kaganovich, had plans that went beyond moving commuters. During World War II, work on the third stage of the metro continued even as the city was under threat, and stations were used as underground shelters from German bombing. There was only one day in the metro's entire 90-year history when it did not operate. On October 16, 1941, the Nazis came dangerously close to Moscow, and Kaganovich was preparing a plan to destroy the subway as a strategic object. There was such panic that the plan was canceled, and that same evening the trains started running again. The fourth and fifth stages were constructed during the late 1940s and into the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War. Consequently, some of the stations were built to withstand a nuclear strike. Today, the Moscow Metro carries over 8 million passengers daily. It stands as the global leader in punctuality at 99.9%. During peak hours, trains arrive as frequently as every 90 seconds. Since 2010, the number of stations has increased by a factor of 1.6, from 182 to 302 stations. In 2023, the Big Circle line was completed, becoming the longest circular metro line on Earth. And here is a detail that I find delightful. The columns and walls of Moscow metro stations are lined with natural stone. If you look closely, you will see fossil patterns and traces of ancient organisms. In total, more than 700 prehistoric fossils, ranging from 70 to 300 million years old, are hidden in the capital's subway. Commuters rush past creatures from the Carboniferous period every single morning without noticing. The first A-type metro cars were assembled at the Maitishki plant in 1934. The pilot models were so successful that they ran in the metro for 40 years. This durability extended to everyday consumer goods, though the story there gets more complicated. Collector Ivan Borisov maintains a collection of Soviet-era appliances, all of which are still in working condition. Among them are a vacuum cleaner and a refrigerator produced in 1945. As Borisov explains, Soviet technical items almost never fail. Vacuum cleaner motors can operate for 40 years. The products were designed not to be profitable, but to make life easier. They had a different meaning initially, but honesty requires acknowledging the full picture. The Soviet Union's obsessive focus on military and strategic technology came at a cost. For consumer goods like juicers, microwaves, sewing machines, and washing machines, quality levels ranged from almost on par with Western standards for some items to far behind for others. The Soviet computing industry, for instance, often produced designs that were theoretically on par with Western ones, but a persistent inability to improve manufacturing quality meant the country could not make practical use of theoretical advances. Quality control was a major weakness. The truth is that the Soviet system excelled at building things for the state and the military and struggled with building things for the individual consumer. Central planning favored the needs of the military greatly, and that is where the legendary durability was concentrated. There is an irony worth sitting with. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, production of many durable goods was halted and replaced by imports of foreign production. They were often cheaper and better looking, but they functioned only for a limited period of time. As Borisov puts it, this is the evil of our time. Not only are we offered a new product every day, but it is also designed to quickly go out of order so that we have to buy a new one. The concept of planned obsolescence, the deliberate design of products to fail after a certain period to drive repeat purchases, is something Soviet engineers would have found philosophically incomprehensible. You do not design something to break. You design something to survive. And now, in 2025, the final chapter of Soviet-era durability is being written. Analysts estimate that 2025 will be the last year Russia can rely on its massive stockpiles of Soviet-era conventional arms, including artillery, main battle tanks, and armored vehicles. If the intensity of combat follows the same pattern as the preceding years, most stockpiles will be exhausted by the second half of the year. Russia continues the war with increasingly older generations of tanks, working backward through the decades, from post-war modifications of the T-72 and the T-62 to the T-54 and the T-55. These are machines that were designed to fight World War III. Instead, they sat in warehouses for decades, and when they were finally needed, they started. They moved. They fired. Not because they were great tanks by modern standards, they were not, but because they were built by people who understood something fundamental about engineering, that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and that a weapon that works every time is infinitely more valuable than a weapon that works brilliantly some of the time. There is something almost philosophical about it all. A nation that collapsed over 30 years ago continues to shape the world through its machines. The AK-47 remains the most recognizable weapon on Earth. The Soyuz is still flying to space. The Moscow metro is still growing. MiG fighters are still patrolling skies across 4 continents. And somewhere in the freezing mud outside a Ukrainian village, a tank that rolled off the assembly line before most of the people reading this were born is still doing its grim work. The Soviet Union built things to last. Not because it was a virtuous society, not because its leaders cared deeply about quality of life, but because it understood, with the hard-won clarity of a nation that lost 27 million people in a single war, that when everything goes wrong, and it will go wrong, the only thing that matters is whether your machine still works. The Soviet Union is gone. Its machines are not.